everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled How Talent Acquisition Leaders Can Drive Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. My name is Georgina Frazier, and I'm the Recruiting Program Manager here at GEM, and my preferred gender pronouns are she and they. I'll be moderating today's webinar presentation presented by GEM. And before we get started, I'm going to quickly go over some housekeeping items, and then we'll ask Alum from GEM's sales team to provide a brief overview of what GEM does. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session and will be accessible through the same link you're using now. We also added some attachments which are available through the Attachments tab at the bottom of your screen. There you can find slides from today's presentations, a few of GEM's ebooks on diversity recruiting, and a few other reports and links to blog posts you might find valuable. We'd love to hear from you during today's presentations, so if you have any questions for Aubrey, Alum, or myself, please feel free to send them through to the Ask a Question tab at the beginning of your at the bottom of your player. We'll also be answering questions at the end of today's presentations. I expect we will have a lot of questions asked and may not have the time to answer all of them, but don't worry. If we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up afterwards. So today's webinar is brought to you and sponsored by GEM. Now I'll hand it over to Alum to quickly introduce you to GEM, and then we'll get right into the meat of our presentation today.
Thanks, Georgina. Hi, everyone. My name is Alum. I'm an account executive here at GEM, and I'm excited to tell you what GEM is. So GEM is an all-in-one recruiting platform that integrates with LinkedIn, email, and your applicant tracking system and eliminates a lot of manual and tedious work that sourcers and recruiters do when reaching out to prospective candidates. So basically, GEM enables data-driven, world-class recruiting teams to find, engage, and nurture top talent. With GEM, customers source 5 times faster, double their response rates, and double their conversions to initial phone screens. GEM partners with over 300 top recruiting teams, such as some of the names you see here, and they are saying great things. You'll notice a common theme of reducing time spent sourcing, insight into the entire funnel, and the ability to manage past candidate relationships over time. So if you are interested in learning more or just like to chat, please feel free to reach out. Again, my name is Alum, and I'd love to hear from all of you. Thanks. And I will pass it back over to Georgina.
Thanks so much, Alum. If anyone has any questions about GEM or would like to have a personalized demo, please let us know by asking us in the Ask the Questions tab, and we'll connect you with Alum after the webinar. Okay. And now I am so pleased to announce today's speaker, Aubrey Blanche, Director of Equitable Design and Impact at Culture AMP. Today she will be sharing what talent acquisition leaders can do to both hire diverse teams and drive equitable and inclusion within their respective organizations. All right, now let's get on to the content of this webinar. Welcome, Aubrey, and thanks so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and I think one of the reasons is because I had the luck to work with so many incredible talent acquisition professionals, and we've gotten to collaborate and learn a ton about building more equitable organizations. But I figure folks on the line might want to know a little bit more about me and my background. As you'll see, it really influences the way that I think about this. So my name is Aubrey. People call me the math path, which means math nerd and empath. So I'm a huge data human, but I also want to bring that data, sort of science and math, to bear to build systems where people can thrive. And so, yeah, I guess I say radical inclusion equals belonging, which is what we're really trying to build. But I want everyone here, what I want you to get is really both a new set of frameworks of how to think about these issues, because what we know is the world has changed a lot. And there's an opportunity to look at things a little bit differently. And so I hope I inspire you to do that. And then we'll dive in deep on some tactics and sort of ways you can redesign and rethink the way that you recruit and the way that your organization sort of builds equity. So really fun. Please do ask questions throughout. I will try to answer them as I go, and then we'll have some Q&A time with Georgina at the end. But before we start, I wanted to level set about a really important point. So we're going to run a couple of polls, and the first one, really easy. Everyone on the line, would you agree with the statement, I care about D&I? And I think what we tend to see in this space is that lots of people express care and express sort of wanting to do the right thing. We see this with corporate statements, right, in the last couple of months that have been saying Black Lives Matter. Companies have beautiful blogs that they've put on their website, but that often that's where the buck stops. Is it's very easy to say you care about something, but what we really want to do is level set about exactly what care means. So now we're going to close that poll. I'm seeing that about 98% of folks on the call say, yes, I care about D&I, which makes sense given the topic. But I want to move to the next question. So the next question is, I consistently practice creating equity in my work. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between diversity and equity a little bit later. But the reason I want to talk about the idea of the difference between I care about D&I and I consistently practice creating equity is that caring doesn't actually help anyone. Taking action, practicing taking action is what helps and supports people and creates opportunities. So it's great that we care, but what I say is in the moment we're in, we don't get credit for caring, we get credit for prioritizing and acting. And that's why I'm really excited to talk to you all, because you all have already taken that first step of acting, and so now the answer is just, we gotta keep doing it. Awesome, all right. And right now what we're hearing is I'm seeing that less people are saying that they consistently practice creating equity. So the really exciting part is that there's an opportunity there for growth and that we can change it immediately. So if we haven't done it yesterday, that's okay. We can still make that choice today. It's always available to us. So now I want to talk a little bit about how companies work. So if anyone on the line doesn't know what this is a photo of the Roman aqueducts. Fun fact, they carried water to ancient Rome. They're a feat of human engineering, but they had something wrong with them. And that thing wrong with them was that the water pipes were lined with lead. Yes, just like in Flint, the water pipes were lined with lead. And I want you to think about inequity within your company the same way, that your company is a feat of human achievement, but that there is exclusion in the pipes, that there is racism and misogyny in the pipes. And what we're trying to do is put new pipes in so that we can appreciate that marvel of engineering, but do it in a way that doesn't harm other folks. So if you think about that, it's how do we adjust things to make them a little less harmful? Now I want to talk a little bit about defining outcomes because language does matter. So first, diversity. Often we say diversity when what we mean is straight, white, cisgender women. So I actually generally tell people to move away from diversity, which is a blurry word, to use more specific words like underrepresented, or to talk about specific groups that we're supporting. So right now we're talking a lot about supporting our Black colleagues and candidates. So let's be specific. It also helps us avoid saying things like diverse candidates, which is incredibly offensive. It's interesting that we choose to call underrepresented people diverse, but we don't call people from majority groups stereotype candidates. So again, being really careful, we have the opportunity as talent acquisition professionals to start changing the language and start using language that's actually respectful to people from underrepresented groups, as opposed to basically calling them not normal. The The next word I want to talk about is inclusion. So we think about building an inclusive space, a space where people feel okay. Inclusive processes are those that consider people from lots of different backgrounds. So really, inclusion, again, has to start first, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, about the number one thing that talent acquisition professionals can do to create fairness within their organization. Now, the next sort of piece of the puzzle is belonging. So what we know is that belonging is actually a deeper need than inclusion. All of us humans want to belong to a space where we're valued. And so I've found often that accessing that idea is more powerful in terms of telling us what to do. So if we're trying to make someone feel like they belong, what would we do? How would we treat them? It looks a little bit different. I often think about the difference between inclusion and belonging is the difference between tolerance and acceptance and celebration. And the last one is equity. So equity, I think, is really where when you're making change, you begin to move from focusing on diversity, which is just about is about counting heads, to equity, which is about creating fair processes. And that's what we're going to talk about today in the webinar. So I want to talk a little bit about the school of thought that I work in, which is called Equitable Design. So this is a mix of design thinking, agile, social justice theory, and then doing that all within the context of organizations. So first, we talk about authentic consent. So we need to make sure that when we ask underrepresented people to help and support us, that we're not putting them in a difficult spot. How does that show up for recruiters? Things like, are we asking our Black ERGs to solve our pipeline problems instead of taking ownership for sourcing better and building better relationship ourselves? Are we asking underrepresented people to sit on interview panels in ways that takes them away from their regular work and can actually hurt their career prospects? So making sure that as we do this, we're really aware of the power dynamics of the requests that we're making, and that we as individuals take ownership for getting to those outcomes. The next idea is intersectionality. So often when we start in this work, we say, well, we're going to start with gender because it's easiest. And what that does is it leads to sort of diversity recruiting programs that are great at creating opportunities for white women, but actively harm Black applicants. And so what the research tells us is that when we focus on creating excellent spaces for Black women, that everyone else also does well. So the types of barriers that we can remove for Black women and Black female candidates, we're actually able to build effective structures for everyone. So again, in design language, that would be designing for the margin is actually universal design. The next principle is community-driven. The other way to say this is nothing for us without us. So make sure that as we define solutions, we're really looking to the communities we're looking to support. In recruiting, that means the communities we're looking to create employment opportunities for, asking them what they want and need, not assuming that we know better than people know themselves. And the last principle is iteration. We know that we're all learning and that our businesses are unique, and these are huge challenges. And so knowing that we should pilot things, try them, see if they work in our context and scale them is a methodology that's much more successful than just implementing a laundry list of best practices. So with these principles in mind, let's talk a little bit about how we get there. So I want to talk a little bit about where we were and where we're going. So statements of intention. What you tend to see is that companies say that they care about an initiative, and then they release a plan for it. And this is the big moment I want to give to all of you on the webinar, which is the best way to completely fail at building an inclusive organization is to make recruiting the first priority. And what I mean by that is I really, really believe that talent acquisition professionals are a key set of allies to do this. But what companies tend to do is they put all of their money and resources into recruiting, but what they haven't actually done is make the culture and make the company a positive, welcoming one for the people that they're recruiting. In the current moment, the phrase that sort of sat with me is someone said, the problem is not finding and hiring Black people, it's making sure that we've hired better white people to be around them. And I offer that to you not to sort of malign one particular group, but to point out that the cultural work is often the thing that supports long-term recruiting success. And so one of the things I would ask of everyone on the call is to look at the size of the D&I team internally compared to the recruiting team and ask hard questions to say, the research tells us that this much focus on recruiting with no focus on culture will set us up to fail. What are we doing and how are we allocating resources to set all of us up to succeed in the long term? A fact is that a company that has 100 headcount in recruiting and 1 in D&I does not care about D&I. Care equals budgets and action, not statements. And that's really what we mean about this accountability for outcomes, which is if you believe that statement of intention, it only becomes real when resources are allocated and priorities are decided upon. Again, we're moving from starting with recruiting to recruiting being a driver and an advocate to support a culture that will attract the right people. So knowing that internal culture, especially for underrepresented people, the whisper network is strong. And so you can't overcome a poor whisper network by updating the careers page on your website. You actually have to fix the whisper network. Next, we're moving from corporate white feminism, so this focus on diversity and not really thinking about everyone within that bucket, to designing for the experiences of Black women, thinking about what we can do to make them thrive, and knowing that other groups will also be better in the reality where that's true. So instead of having zero-sum thinking, we're actually moving to abundance thinking, and we're creating more rather than fighting over scarce resources. We're moving from using the word diverse, right? We're throwing it out of our vocabulary because we realize that using that word actually allows us to cover up the problem. We're talking about underrepresented people. We're talking about under-opportunity people. We talk about people who are historically marginalized. And when we talk about our teams, we don't say that our teams are diverse, because oftentimes what that's code for is we have people who are different from each other on the team, which is awesome and true, but often allows us to ignore issues of equity. So what I like to tell people is we have a team that's balanced in these ways. So perhaps you have a team that's balanced in terms of ability or balanced in terms of gender, but some of your teams have issues around balance with race. And so talking about balance, building balanced teams and sort of growing balanced teams is a way for us to be intentional and specific. So to really quickly answer one of the questions about, we don't want to focus on any one group in our D&I activities, my answer to that with executives, which is that, well, you can do that, but you will not be successful. So that is a belief that you can hold, but it will fail in building an inclusive culture, because the fact is that certain groups have been focused on a lot more throughout history and throughout sort of corporate America. And so without correcting for that, you're very unlikely to be able to fix those things. So it's not that we care more or believe that someone has more dignity or more importance, but rather there are certain people who need more support, and we should give the support to those people. So there, and then I also want to talk about the difference between companies and teams, and I hope this empowers you. So a lot of times companies focus on making a company more inclusive or making a company more diverse, and I think that it's more useful. It's more useful to talk about teams and what can we each do to make each of our teams more inclusive. Because one of the really cool things about that is we can all change our sphere of influence. And if each of us changes our team just a little bit, suddenly the whole company changes. So just changing where we're looking. Really quickly for the question about designing for Black women, so that is based on the theory of intersectionality developed by Kimberly Crenshaw. A really good resource that I've used, I believe it's called the Diana Initiative, actually showed that over the last 6 years in the tech industry, sort of the way that D&I has been done, which is I'm sort of saying not enough, has shown that white women have benefited from almost all of those gains, while Black women's representation has actually dropped over the same time. So evidence showing that without focusing specifically on Black women and their experiences, you will leave them behind. Also, you can look at research on the way that affirmative action programs and the benefits of those affirmative action programs, who they've gone to. Fun fact, if you're in America, the white women have been the group that has benefited the most from affirmative action programs, even though there's often social belief that it is in fact Black Americans. All right, now moving on a little bit, the new playbook. We can do things differently. So the question that should inspire you and the way that I think about equitable design is in everything I do, everything I source, every connection I make, every professional favor I do, every process I design. Does this create equal power or opportunity? And if we can design with that in mind, suddenly we build more effective talent acquisition processes, but also ones that tend to get us the best and most balanced set of candidates. So I want to step back real quickly before we get into the tactics, which is the first part of this work is knowing yourself and understanding why you haven't taken action before. Maybe that reason was you didn't have the knowledge, but excitingly, after this webinar and hopefully with more self-study, you will. You'll have that answer. You'll have that knowledge. Or maybe it's that you didn't have the influence or the power, and I hope that what you have is, I don't need to change the company. I can change myself and my team. So yeah, again, knowing why you haven't acted and the work that you have to do is really important and will empower you to find new ways to act and to keep it up. So now let's move into practice and talk a little bit about what this looks like in the new world. So like I say to you, please make it real. We give this information and hope that you take it forward and build a better world. Really quickly, a question from the audience, diverse, sort of offensive, upsetting. Should we rename initiatives? I call them Equitable Design and Impact at Culture Amp. I like the word equity and belonging. So yeah, I want to just those words that work for me. But what I think is if you want to talk about diversity generally, but there's no reason to call an individual person diverse. The fact is an individual person by definition cannot be diverse. So making sure that you're using diversity to describe a broad set of people, not using it to mean underrepresented or marginalized. Cool. All right. The next principle, question everything about a best practice that you've been taught. Ask yourself, why can't we choose differently, right? Just because we've given unfair advantages in the past to candidates who went to schools that have fancy names doesn't mean we have to do that going forward. Just because we've looked at the companies people have worked at previously, which we know have had historically discriminatory hiring because most companies have, we don't have to do that anymore. We can choose differently, and that's what I hope to empower you with, is that you get to be in the driver's seat. Now let's talk about effective talent acquisition. So first, we need to hold ourselves accountable for outcomes. That doesn't mean that we require ourselves to hire from certain groups. So really important, it is illegal to do that, but rather that we use outcomes as a measure of whether we're creating fair processes. Structure. This is the golden rule of everything about bias, which is the more structure and the more documentation you have, the less opportunity there is for bias and unfairness to creep into a lot of the process. So make sure that you're creating a lot of structure around your recruiting. Then you have to audit it. So this is where I think, GEM is putting on this webinar and where a tool like GEM can help you. So they've recently released features to help you track at each stage of your recruiting funnel whether you're connecting with those underrepresented candidates. So looking at your pipeline and saying, are we connecting with those folks? Is it at the beginning stage? Or is it that people are not getting through our process? How can we think about that? Are we really assessing for the qualities we need to? And then the last thing is feedback. So we need to take a lot of feedback on this. Because this work is for people, we know that we're going to try. We're going to take that feedback in and then keep iterating. How can leaders create and sustain equitable recruitment practices that aren't dependent on individuals pushing for change? I think that the specific way leaders can do that is to allocate budget for it, create metrics, and create public accountability. So how the exact same way that leaders create and sustain absolutely any other business priority. The skills are identical. And again, what's really the difference is the will. And so I think what we can do is stand in our power and name that. It's not that you can't, it's that you won't. So the number one thing that leaders can do is choose to make it a priority with their budget and their time. Now, I want to talk about the question that is probably most useful to recruiters on the call, which is, does this assessment I'm designing about someone's skills and capabilities measure the privilege that they have or the abilities that they have? What tends to happen is that for many traditional recruiting processes, they actually are just measuring how privileged someone is. And so what we've seen is that hiring processes often act as affirmative action programs for people who are economically privileged or privileged in terms of their racial identity or gender. So now let's get into some examples of what this looks like. So the first thing that you can do is design your assessment. So how do you figure out whether someone's good at something? And I think that there's so many different ways to do this, but the first is look at your company values, right? Are you measuring for behaviors and values on the way in? Or are you just looking for particular technical experiences? Are you using proxies like, did this person go to a, quote, top university? A fun fact for everyone on the webinar is that statistically speaking, the number one predictor of whether a student went to a, quote, top tier university is how much money their parents make. So as a graduate of Stanford and Northwestern, I can tell you that not all the smart people in the world go there, and there are plenty of people who are just there because they could pay for it. So brilliant people come from every university, every walk of life. And I think as recruiters and as talent acquisition professionals, we can be on the front line of recognizing that. So really moving to skills-based interviewing can be great. Asking people to demonstrate those behaviors as opposed to looking for, well, did you have these 3 job titles? Or did you work at companies that have these specific names? The next thing, recruiters can write more effective job ads. So this might sound really minor, but if you write a job ad that has a list of 10 requirements, you've both statistically lowered your overall quality of your talent pool and told underrepresented people not to apply. Straight up. So Testio has done a lot of incredible research in this space, and what they've shown is that because underrepresented people are socialized to not be overconfident, when there are long lists of requirements of specific experiences or certifications that people have had, often it discourages underrepresented groups from applying, and so recruiters are cutting off their own pipeline and their own quality of talent. So thinking about writing the job ad as framing the opportunity, not putting ridiculous fake requirements in place. But that, like, as a good example, my first chief diversity officer job, one of the requirements was 5+ years of doing D&I and high growth tech in a global perspective. At the year that happened, I was not aware of anyone on earth who had that experience. And of the 12 items on that job description, I had 2 of the requirements and I still got the job. So that's the one thing you can do as a recruiter, is make sure that a requirement is required, not a unicorn wish list of a fake person who doesn't exist, but who only a person from a majority group is going to identify with. or much more likely that person from the majority group, even though they may not be the only qualified person, and they certainly are not the only qualified demographic for that. Train your panel. Sounds really basic, but give folks some intuition and training about what they need to know. So first, I think teaching them and touching on bias is important. Although we know that designing our structures is a better way to get rid of bias, training cannot get rid of it. It can simply make people aware. Help them understand the correct way to talk about DEI. Help them understand the DEI actions and initiatives that are happening at your company. And most importantly, help the panel understand that in order to bring underrepresented candidates onto the team, each person on the hiring panel is going to have to be able to speak to the way that they enable DEI at the company. So it's not enough to be an interviewer because we owe it to underrepresented candidates to say, here's how I'm making the place I work a great place for you. And there's no better way to make sure that an underrepresented person refuses a job offer you've gotten them than convincing them that no one cares about their experience when they're coming in. Next, source like pro. And what I mean by that is think creatively. This is a really fun space, I think, where talent acquisition professionals can come up with new ways to source. So did you know that Hispanic people are the most underrepresented on LinkedIn? Maybe not. So how can we go to the places where people are? Certainly we talk about external partnerships, but also, do you know that Black Twitter is more engaged than any other demographic group on Twitter? Instead of just pinging on LinkedIn, I can tell you that I've spent time in my life literally tweeting job ads at people who have really interesting stuff on software and design. Do you go to Amazon and read who's written book reviews to see who's qualified at a thing? I think that sourcing, we really need to broaden out and think about where are people on the internet. If you are really great at sort of setting up filters, I've had Google Alerts is a great tool to tell you where people are on the internet. So I have Google Alerts set up to make sure that anyone who has a postgraduate degree in a technical field and they're on the internet, I know who they are if they're underrepresented. That's something you can set up for yourself to begin building pools of talent to reach out to. So remove the referral advantage. A lot of companies ask for referrals, but if their company is really homogenous, those referrals are by definition racist in impact and often sexist and ableistic, et cetera. So make sure that, not that you need to get rid of referrals, but be really thoughtful about them. Are you making sure that everyone is prioritizing networking and making connections with so that they can refer underrepresented people? Are you giving an advantage in the hiring process because someone knows someone who works with you? Because knowing someone at your company is not actually a job skill. And so understanding that. And 6, again, collect feedback and audit regularly. So using technical tools like GEM can help you with this to understand the health of your pipeline. I really quickly want to get into a couple of conversations. How can we target underrepresented groups without showing favoritism? And this may come up later. What do you do with someone who isn't considered underrepresented after it's reverse racism if we don't consider others like the current team? So I want to be really clear that what I'm not saying is refuse to consider applicants from majority groups. That's absolutely not my advice. It's illegal. You shouldn't do it. But what I'm saying is that you're looking at the world and knowing that it is already giving favoritism to people from majority groups. And what we're saying is we're getting rid of the favoritism that exists for those majority groups and making it fair for everyone. So that's why we have diversity recruiting targets, not diversity recruiting quotas, because quotas are not actually legal and they don't incentivize us to do the right thing. So yeah, when people say it's reverse discrimination, what I often respond with is, are you assuming the way things worked before were not discriminatory? I have never seen research to suggest that the way things currently are not discriminatory, and so what we're actually doing is making the situation fair. If you have research to suggest that the world is fair, like that's something we'd love to see. And someone also said, by creating a structure, can't the structure continue to cause inequity? Yes, it absolutely can. And I would say that unconscious bias is far less important than the biased conscious decisions that we've made. So unconscious bias was kind of the word that DEI professionals had to use because people didn't want to deal with their own racism or sexism. And now that I think we're having a more open dialogue, unconscious bias is real, it's impactful, but that conscious bias and conscious decision-making has a much greater impact. So yeah, really, really great question. So when we're creating that structure, we need to create structure that's aligned to this idea of equitable design. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about what equitable assessments look like specifically for those of you, to make it real, because I know you live and breathe this all day. So, you know, discriminatory things, look at degrees or previous employers. Instead, let's just look at demonstrated skills. Why is that useful? Well, because it's actually really predictive of whether someone's going to be a great teammate. So right, we're upping the validity and the usefulness of our assessment, but also being thoughtful to remove a lot of those social biases. We want to make sure that we're not assessing in ways that require special knowledge. So, you know, I think everyone's familiar with the how many golf balls fit in a 747 question. We know those don't work to tell us anything about someone's job performance. But also I work in the technology field where a lot of times we're asking questions about algorithms and knowing specific things, the types of items that people would Google when they were working. So if someone would Google it while working, they shouldn't have to answer it in an interview. So again, really focusing on work products and skills, whether that's portfolios or running exercises with recruiters, but actually getting people to demonstrate the skills that they have. Because often, especially for those of us who are underrepresented like myself, we've often gained our skills in non-traditional ways. So for example, I actually am a product manager in terms of a lot of the work I've done, but I don't have any formal certification in product management except a small online course I took. And so it would be much more useful to assess whether I'm a good product manager by asking me about product management than looking for like a degree that I don't have. Transparent processes are best. So helping underrepresented people understand what's expected. What we know is that people who come from majority groups often have a lot of social advantages. Things like they know how business works. They are more likely to have parents in professional working organizations. And so there's just things that might seem obvious to us but aren't obvious. I think in tech, one of the examples we often give is we let people know that we don't expect people to dress up for their interviews. That's a cultural difference in tech that is very different from other industries. So depending on what industry you're in, thinking about how can we give candidates guidance about what every step of the process looks like. We don't improve our quality of assessment by surprising or gotchaing our candidates with surprise exercises or things like that. And then also don't consider accessibility. So I really encourage folks to remember that ableism and access is a huge issue. So making sure, for example, that all candidates, you've communicated to them about the different ways to get to an interview. Obviously, we're on video now, so that's helpful. But offering and making sure that candidates have a way to allocate that they need support if they have vision or mobility impairments or need support with hearing or auditory engagement. So again, really, really thinking about access as well. And then we don't call people diverse. We see URMs as uniquely qualified. So this goes back to a question on the line, which is, how do I tackle the issue of the most qualified candidate? A tangible opportunity and experience chasm for underrepresented groups. Yeah, I think, quite frankly, my answer is that I've made the design decision that there's literally no such thing as the most qualified candidate. There is absolutely no such thing. There are different people with different sets of skills and experiences. But what I would also say to the hiring manager is that you are not just hiring a role, you are bringing a person onto a team. And so the research actually shows that people who are different than their teammates help the team perform better. And so from my perspective, and there's lots of game theory, Scott Page's The Difference lays this out quite well. is that literally having a different set of life experiences is a qualification, and that is a design choice that you as talent acquisition leaders can build into your process. It doesn't mean that we will always hire a candidate from an underrepresented group, but that we are rarely making apples-to-apples comparisons, and in many cases, people sort of rabbit-holing on that issue are actually just avoiding the problem and stonewalling progress. Not that they're necessarily intending to, but I want to name that pattern and empower you to say, I hear you, that's a tiny theoretical problem, and we're actually being practical and creating change. So yeah. All right, I want to skip through these slides one more time. But again, this is really your map for equitably designing your talent acquisition process. So one thing I want to empower with, and I know we have a lot of great questions, but you already know how to do so much of this. You know how to build a strategy. You know how to write an assessment. And so really what you have to add in is that knowledge of DEI. So prioritizing self-education, learning about these issues. I use social media for this. So periodically I go in and I try to listen to people from underrepresented groups and experts. And this speaks to a lot about how can we train our panel on bias. The answer is pay experts to do it, but also educate yourself. So if you're not qualified yet, that's also a thing that you can change, which I think is really amazing. And I want to empower you all to feel like you have agency to create change. And if it's for your team, that's still change that matters. If you can do it at the company level, that is also change that matters. But know that we have to do the things that are within our control. And if each of us does that, the whole world changes in really awesome ways. So you already know how to do it. Okay. And the last item I wanted to say to folks, and then we'll dive into questions, and we'll get the luck of having Georgina with us, is that there isn't really an end point to this work. So how do we know we're done? The answer is when all human beings can flourish and are given the opportunities that they've earned, which is probably a long way away from this exact moment. But it's important as we think about taking a more activist stance to this, that we know that rest is a part of the long-term sustainability. So if you're tired, if you've been advocating, it's okay to take a step back for a moment to recharge yourself, to give yourself space and put your own mask on before you step back into the arena. And I think that's really something I want to empower you all with, is that we all have our own activism and our own ways to push for change. We have to take care of ourselves and then always ask the question, once we are well, how do we help other people and get them the opportunities that they need in the world? So I'm going to jump to Q&A, but Georgina, do you want to jump back in and we can have a little bit of a conversation?
Definitely. Oh my gosh,
awesome.
Aubrey, thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I have so much homework to do. I was taking notes the entire time. I'm so excited for this Q&A right now.
Well,
so actually,
let
let's
me say,
just
I'm an Uber nerd, so homework is my favorite.
I love it. So now we're going to, just kick off this wonderful Q&A. I see all of these questions. I want to remind the audience that you can continue to ask questions in the Ask a Question tab at the bottom of your webinar player. And please ask any questions that come to mind, and we'll try to get through as many of them as possible, and then follow up afterward by posting a Q&A blog that we'll share with you next week.
Oh, that's incredible. Thank you so much to the team for doing all of that.
Oh, of course. Thank you for giving us a bunch of things that we could put into our blog post.
Yeah, so we have a ton of questions, and I know you're sort of like the expert on talent acquisition, and we're sort of coming together. Lots of questions. Where do you think we should start? I can read through them, or do you think there's anything foundational you want to make sure we get in?
Yeah, let's start with this question, and then feel free to take it over after that.
Yeah.
How can we train our panel on bias if we aren't necessarily qualified to do that?
Yeah, I think part of it is, one, there is a ton of available literature on this. So I think obviously as a company, they're on their specific journey, but Facebook, so I think it's managingbias.fb.com, has actually released their unconscious bias sort of training on the internet. So that's a free resource that's available to everyone. And again, going back to this idea that I love this idea of saying we're not experts in it, right? Like, I think all of this work takes humility, but the other side of the coin that I want to offer to people is you're not an expert yet. Meaning that there is always time for you to choose to learn more and up your mastery. It doesn't mean that you have to be the world's expert on the topic, but there's so much written that I always think about the magic of what if someone committed to spending 5 minutes a day for 1 month learning about one topic, or saying, I will read one blog or one, sort of 2 paragraphs per day about this topic. Imagine how much you would know in a month if that was your activism for the month. And so I would encourage people to think about it that way, which is both what resources are available to be the expert until I get there, but also what teeny tiny step can I take every day towards that goal, not even worrying about the expert piece, just saying what's my daily step.
Oh, I love that. I was going to say Google, but that's a better answer.
I think so many people are like, Aubrey, can you recommend this thing? And I'm like, I will Google this topic for you. So, I think that's a part of it, is we're so lucky to have so many perspectives and knowledge accessible to us in a way that we never have before in history. And so that's, I think, the thing I would hope to give to everyone is that, this field of equitable design, I would say that I'm self-taught by hundreds of teachers, in that I've been lucky to benefit from what people have shared of what they know, and that's something that we all can take on.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah. I have another question that I would love to answer unless you have something.
No, that's great. What's the next question?
I'm finding that unrepresented people aren't responding to my reach out. How can I get them to connect with me?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think, and something that a lot of recruiters and especially sourcers are hitting right now, which the fact is every company and their second cousin is pinging every Black person on LinkedIn right now and being like, do you want a job? And the thing I would have to say to that is, like, answer the question for yourself, why would they respond? Like, why would you respond to a reach out? And then why would they? If what's happening is that companies, after, seeing something in the news, are immediately going out and reaching out to underrepresented candidates. And I'm speaking about Black candidates in particular because I think it's what's timely, but this is true for all groups.
Totally.
It doesn't appear authentic, right? I imagine that for a lot of underrepresented folks right now, and the folks I've spoken to have validated this hypothesis, is that it doesn't feel real. And it's really why I tell companies that want to be successful, I know it feels really satisfying to focus on recruiting as a first priority and sort of getting folks in the pipeline as the first priority. But the fact is, being able to answer the question, is your business a place that, like, gives a shit about those people? And if you can't really say yes, then your role as a recruiter is to give that message to your company and say, hey, I'm educating myself and I want to be the #1 advocate for this organization for creating opportunities for those people, but I need to make sure that they will be treated well once I hand them over to my HR and talent. So, and the reason I want to say that is because the fact is, again, whisper networks exist. It's possible that people aren't responding because they're busy, they've gotten too many messages, or maybe they've heard about the way that HR treated one of your Black employees 2 years ago and they don't want to deal with it. And so I want to offer that the other thing that I would really, really encourage recruiters not to say is please stop opening your sourcing mails with, we care about diversity, underrepresented person. I actually think it's more important for sourcers to be really clear about companies valuing equity and diversity with majority group candidates. So be really clear with all candidates that when you're coming here, you're signing up to prioritize inclusion. And that is a thing we will hold you to in your job performance. We hope you're in, we'd love to have you. But it doesn't feel great as an underrepresented person to get the reach out that says, we care about diversity. I'm like, why don't you care about my professional brilliance and what I have to bring to the table? Because white people get to talk about technology and Black people get to talk about diversity. As a Latina woman, I talk about diversity all day long. But that's something I want recruiters to think about is it can make people feel tokenized, even though the intent is really good.
Totally. +1 to all of that. I definitely want to +1 to how, if you're reaching out to someone that's a URM candidate, they are going to do research, right? Like they're going to Google what your leadership team looks like. You know, if you're a startup, what your investors look like, what's your presence on Twitter, what's your presence on LinkedIn. So know that anytime you reach out to someone, they're definitely going to do that research. And if you don't have an answer for why your company or your team hasn't thought about diversity and inclusion, be ready to answer that question.
Yeah, and I think like I'll speak. I work at Culture Amp, and it's a really good example. So Culture Amp was founded more than a decade ago, or about a decade ago, in Australia by, to quote my CEO, 4 straight white male brunettes. And one of the, and you know, and he's partially being funny, but he's also being really honest, which is that, you know, he says, you know, we have to come up with different ways to help people understand that we're prioritizing racial equity. So for Culture Amp, what that looks like today is we're really open and honest about where our gaps are. We also have, you know, 2 open roles in our C-suite right now, and we're saying we're prioritizing a lot of sourcing muscle around underrepresented candidates and also, you know, majority of candidates who come to us. But we also released our very detailed plan for D&I and how to evolve as an anti-racist organization. So any candidate that is concerned about the fact that all of our founders are white men can also go to our website and see that all of our executives have committed to a 4-month-long deep dive executive coaching program to understand anti-Blackness and to evolve as anti-racist practitioners. They can see that all of the directors and above at Culture Amp are in the process of developing their own anti-racism goals, which will be a requirement for all of our leaders at Culture Amp going forward. So a lot of times we can't fix the history of what our board and what our executive team look like in the moment, but what we can do is be very explicit about the actions we're taking to move the organization to be a positive place for people from all backgrounds. And I think that's what I want to inspire folks on the webinar to do, is accept it, like we cannot change history, but we and us, those of us in power, those of us inside companies, have the power to make different choices, and we are responsible if we don't.
I love that. +1 to all of that. That makes me think about the work that GEM is doing as well. And one thing we're doing is 100% outbound sourcing for what we've identified as unrepresented talent at our organization. And also we have like a long-term nurture strategy for leadership talent, right? For any talent, but specifically leadership talent, because URMs are not represented in our leadership team now. So I love that. Thank you for all.
And I think I want to balance, like, you can do something with you can't do everything, right? And that's like always going to be the tension with this work is, but that's what I say, if you've done nothing, right? So even if your leaders are saying we're not going to prioritize culture, what you can say is, I don't feel okay sourcing people who I don't think will be treated well internally. Right? You can say that. And so that's what I would welcome is how do you make sure, you know, when people say, well, we need to update our careers page, can you raise your hand and say, that feels like the thing that should go last on the roadmap, right? It's a tiny comment, but how does it change the world so that we can move from putting pictures of Black people on our websites to actually building anti-racist organizations? And that's something that each of us can raise our voice for. And I say anti-racist, but you could also do that with, you know, anti-ableist. We could do it with gender equitable organizations. And really that's what it takes each of us doing.
Totally. I love that. I wanted to touch on something, a really good question that someone asked. I love whoever you are that brought in why capitalism is bad. Thank you. I see you spiritually. But people talk a lot about the business case for DEI initiatives. So there's a really, really great Fast Company article that just came out about a month and a half ago that talks about the fact that the business case for diversity actually started showing up as a narrative point in the 80s when people started trying to dismantle affirmative action programs. So what I tell people very openly
is that the research on the business case is clear, and if you don't understand it, you're probably not qualified to be a business leader in 2020. In terms, and the fact is, like, the business case for diversity hasn't really moved the needle. It's just kind of like capitalism gaslighting us to say that, to like make people feel better. But the idea of like justifying this in capitalist terms, my feeling is if it actually created change, I would do it, because ultimately what I want is for marginalized people to have the opportunities they deserve. But at some point, like, seeing human beings as units of productivity that exist to create more money, like, will fail us as a philosophy. So that's like very deep and specific for folks who are thinking there. So I think what it comes down to is, if the business case will get the funding and it will get the support so that you can build human flourishing and economic opportunity, it's a tool in our toolbox. But if that is the be-all, end-all reason that we're doing the work, we probably won't get that far. So I say it's the hand we're dealt at present, but we always want to keep a touch point with the idea that what we're doing is actually benefiting humanity, because humans matter, regardless of the money that they produce. At least that's my particular belief. Obviously, I think other folks, but I'm like, human dignity is non-negotiable, even if you're not generating money. So yeah, I think that's it, is we constantly have to toy with that.
Totally. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say really quickly, one of our partner companies is encouraging their employees to increase the diversity of our talent pool. That's actually the place you should use the word diversity. It's such a great example, right? Where you're clearly talking about the mix of all people. But my guidance is always, when you're talking about a specific group, use the specific word. I actually think that using the word diversity is a coping mechanism for people who are worried about saying the word Black. And that is, in fact, an artifact of anti-Blackness. So remember that the specific labels that groups have chosen for themselves are not dirty words. They are the words we should use out of respect for their agency. Diversity is only to be used when we're talking really broadly and truly about the mix of identities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that definition. That's so wonderful. I have one more question that I want to ask. What would you say if your company's leadership thinks you're too small to have ERGs?
I think I would ask what that means. You know, in any group, like if you have a company of 4 people, I imagine that the ERG would just be the company. But, you know, at Culture Amp, we're about 400 people, give or take, and we have 6 ERGs. You know, some of them are bigger than others and things like that, and our ally groups, right, the sizes differ. But really the question is not about how big we are, but what need is there for a community, for a group. You know, at Culture Amp, we are a bit smaller and we're global, so our ERG for racially and ethnically underrepresented people is Camp Color. So we have spaces for all people of color, but we also allow, for example, our Black campers to have a space that's just for themselves. So you can create unique models for ERGs, but I think the question is not size, it's need.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, at GEM, we're over 70, and we have ERGs now, and we have about 9 of them. Yeah, and it's been so amazing to see the kinds of work and the community building that's been happening. Oh, thank you so much. Aubrey,
thank you.
So
no, I mean,
today.
I could talk forever. I'm so grateful to GEM for creating the opportunity. And I want to give an extra big shout out to everybody on the line for taking an hour out of what is your probably incredibly busy, stressful in the middle of a pandemic, and for all the other things you're juggling ways. To take this time to learn and educate yourself is so important and really incredible. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for all of the work that you all are going to go out and do in the world. This is the type of stuff that changes history, one tiny action at a time. So know that you're a part of that, and we're all in it together.
Yes. Thank you, audience, for those wonderful questions. Once again, we're going to follow up with a blog post, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Thanks again, Aubrey.
Thank you so much. Thank you, GEM team.
Bye.